would like to offer the floor to Iris van der Tuin. She contributed a text that will, in a very interesting way, connect to what Charles was just saying. The text is, the contribution is titled Generational Othering and the Dutch Obsession with the Here and Now. And just one sentence about Iris. Iris is a PhD candidate and junior teacher in gender studies at Utrecht University. Her PhD dissertation is on new feminist epistemologies and European women's studies. She has coined the terms third wave materialism and jumping generations to account for the co-constitution of new feminist materialist epistemologies and the third feminist wave. Iris.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to revisit my contribution to the Citizens and Subjects Reader and to place it in the context of the project as a whole. In my piece, indeed entitled Generational Othering and the Dutch Obsession with the Here and Now, I discussed the stifling effects of the generational dynamics of the Dutch debate on migrants and refugees. I argued that in the commentaries of Dutch, mainly right-wing authors, immigrants and refugees are predominantly referred to in terms of their own or their grandparents or their parents' place of birth, their so-called country of origin. They are often not discussed in terms of their nationality. Many others have a Dutch passport, but are labeled Surinamese or Italian or Moroccan or Turkish or Somali or Polish, etc. Origin, as in country of origin, suggests an external cause to which one can refer in case of problems or conflicts. Moreover, the problematic effect is often singled out as the logical consequence, origin as in cause. The insinuation is that the social effects, religious or Islamic fundamentalism, women as second-class citizens, homophobia, bad school results for boys, etc., have come about by necessity. I then claim that the country of origin has a spatial, there versus here, and temporal, past versus present dimension. Researchers and journalists generally employ time and space as independent and stable variables rather than as phenomena having their own, sometimes erratic, dynamics. Time and space are considered to be predetermined rather than determined by. And this overlooks the fact that boundaries are actually drawn rather than found. This is not to say that one should ignore the fact that these practices of cutting lead to sedimentation. What binds the different layers of the process together is sticky science, to use a concept of Sarah Ahmed. And this concept refers to the histories that have become stuck to science and to the science that have become stuck to bodies. The sign immigrant, for instance, has undergone changes on the basis of the historical events of decolonization, the fall of the Berlin Wall, European enlargement and war. But it has come to refer to certain subjects in the Netherlands, non- or Eastern Europeans, despite the fact that lots of these subjects have been born here or have a Dutch passport. Thus, ignoring practices of cutting naturalizes boundaries and linguistic conventions. And this is problematic, I argued, because migrants are assigned supposedly unchangeable characteristics, meanings, roles, and places in the process. The only way out is through transcendence of the country of origin into Dutchness. In other words, migrants can only lose when they and their actions are judged based on a fixed past that either constrains them or has to be transcended. In both cases, negotiation becomes almost impossible. This analysis of the current situation I followed up by proposing an alternative conceptualization of the generational aspect of debates on migrants and refugees. And I claim that this alternative has the potential to overcome the stifling effects I just reviewed. I asked myself, what if present-day continuously shifting conditions continuously redefine the past? What if we imagine the past as a trickster, to use a word from Donna Haraway, as multiple and multi-layered and open for reinterpretation? What if the coordinates of spaces are flexible and we conceptualize them as heterogeneous and open for various interpretations? I claim that overlooking contemporary debates, the event of migration is not allowed to travel from the past through the present and into the future, to change along the way and form a creative potential. The event is fixed with reference to the past, and its fixed meaning haunts the present and future of the subjects in question. It is presented as a constraint for them which we can point at. This rigid approach, I claimed, hinders both dialogue and the flow of information across the many ethnic communities in Dutch society today, because it entails new forms of compartmentalization. Moreover, the strict usage of the term generation has a certain teleological twist to it that reinforces assumptions assigned to immigrants or asylum seekers. It is presumed, therefore, that members of the so-called third generation have become more Dutch and less attached to the so-called norms, values, culture and religion of their grandparents' country of origin. A consequence of this is that Dutch or Dutchness remains seemingly untouched. And what I proposed is to reconceptualize time as other than causal linearity, that is, to start from understanding the past, present and future as co-constitutive and interlocked or interlocking, rather than successive and isolatable. The past is not merely something that defines or constrains us. It is something to take with us and to cherish and characterize and criticize along the way. We need to allow for a deterritorialization from a past which is comprised of both constraint and undecidability. Deterritorialization does away with the past as fully defining, constraining and determining present and future, while acknowledging the maybe constraining influence of the past on present and future. The theory of deterritorialization simultaneously allows for surprising connections between past, present and future that can lead to unexpected outcomes. Thinking through the present condition, one needs to include the past, because cutting off the past leads to a seductive apotheosis that has damaging effects for individual migrants and forecloses the possible lessons we can learn from the past. Time as constraining and liberating brings together the legacies of the past and the potentials of the future. Utilizing this approach, one is neither seduced by a fantasy working towards pure Dutchness, nor paralyzed by an isolatable cause, backward otherness. In my contribution to the reader, I propose that the generative potential of generationality lies in its ability to unblock the Dutch public debate on immigrants and refugees, which is currently predicated on the dialectical opposition us versus them, past versus present, and here versus there. The potentiality of generation rests in a non-linear notion of time that does away with the seductive power of chronology. It also holds a privileged link to creative experiments in art practice or scholarship, where non-linearity constitutes the starting point for attacking narcissism and nostalgia and practices of othering. The incorporation of deterritorializing strategies such as rethinking, recitals, or intertextuality in these practices avoids generational othering. And in this way, critical artistic practices generate insight into time, space, and generations as boundary projects through an inquiry of the material and discursive forces involved. So for a better understanding of the place of my contribution to the critical reader in the project as a whole, a project consisting of scholarly and artistic production, I want to introduce another theoretical concept. In my contribution to the reader and in my talk so far, I've spoken about generationality and about its constraining, stifling effects, its undecidable effects, its potentiality, so to speak. When we disrupt generational linearity, the generational progress narrative, according to which immigrants lose their original characteristics, generation by generation. My field of expertise is feminist theory, and present-day feminist theory is attentive to the ways in which the history of feminism is being retold. And in this context, it often reconsiders the generational dimension of stories about feminism. Recently, this debate was enriched by a term reintroduced by Astrid Henry that encompasses both the continuity and rivalry between generations of feminists or women. She argues that the binary opposition of continuity versus rivalry masks the ambivalent relation between generations of feminists. Feminists of the past are neither necessarily our arch rivals nor, unproblematically, our sisters, she said. They are, or should be at best, both. Henry explains in her book Not My Mother's Sister that there is a new generation of third-wave feminists that relates to second-wave feminism according to a pattern of so-called disidentification. Disidentification signifies at once the identification against something or somebody and the intimate concentration on the otherness of the other person. If, as a feminist, you wish to identify against Simone de Beauvoir, for instance, you will need to know her work intimately. You must know it by heart. And Henry explains that disidentification does not involve refusal. I refuse to relate to the work of Simone de Beauvoir, but rather a resistance to an identification that has already been made. I don't want to identify with de Beauvoir because she claims universal rather than specific validity for her statements about women. However, I am being lured to her books over and over and over again. So de Beauvoir's feminism is then acknowledged but not accepted as the desired type of feminism for third-wave feminism. The concept of disidentification helps to think through generationality as a notion that neither involves sheer rivalry nor continuity. It accounts for both continuity between women and for specific cases of inequality between women based on, for instance, nation, ethnicity, or sexuality. The notion also makes clear that a feminist wave or a feminist generation is neither completely new nor entirely the same, and so a simple copy or a repetition. Because of this identification, you can think and talk about continuity and change in feminist thought, and you can think about continuity and change at once. It allows for waves or generational positionings while making clear that the still pattern of rivalry between women is not repeated. Okay, I want to conclude by claiming two things. First of all, disidentification is one way in which the non-linear development of migrants and their relation to Dutchness, but also their origin, can be conceptualized. Disidentifying with both the country of origin of one's grandparents and with the Dutch does not fix someone. It does not erect boundaries, but allows for unexpected outcomes and complexifies processes. And secondly, I want to claim that what, in my view, has happened in this project, Citizens and Subjects, is engendering a disidentification with the Dutch current-day situation, which is, among other things, a situation characterized by generational linearity, but also by unflexible citizenship, under-theorized post-secularism, and so on and so on. All contributions to the reader and to the lecture series, as well as the pavilion itself, can be said to be characterized by, on the one hand, an intimate engagement with the Dutch situation. We do not allow for the situation to become part of the covered parameter of our work, yet we know it very, very, very well. And on the other hand, a critical distancing from it. Disidentification, that is, does not entail identification with Dutchness, the government machinery allowing for fires in detention centers, with voting against European citizenship, with cheap tolerance and consensus. It does encompass identification against it, yet in a non-dialectical and very intimately informed manner. This project has, in my eyes, not closed its eyes for the bad effects of Dutchness, for the bad effects of government policy, for people's vote against Europe based on limited information, etc. Nor was it based on a simple shock effect. I read this project as a disidentifying move, which is, in generational terms, the least reductive that we can get.